Listen to a conversation between a student and a library employee.
Excuse me, can you help me with something?
I'll do my best. What do you need?
Well, I received a letter in my mailbox saying that I'm supposed to return a book that I checked out back in January. It's called Modern Social Problems. But because I'm writing my senior thesis, I'm supposed to be able to keep the book all semester.
So, you signed up for extended borrowing privileges?
Yeah.
But we're still asking you to bring the book back?
Uh-huh.
Well, let me take a look and see what the computer says. The title was Modern Social Problems?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I see. It's been recalled. You can keep it all semester as long as no one else requests it, but someone else has. It looks like one of the professors in the sociology department has requested it, so you have to bring it back even though you've got extended borrowing privileges. You can check out the book again when it's returned in a couple of weeks.
But I really need this book right now.
Do you need all of it, or is there a certain section or chapter you're working with?
I guess there's one particular chapter I've been using lately for a section of my thesis. Why?
Well, you can photocopy up to one chapter of the book. Why don't you do that for the chapter you're working on right now, and by the time you need the rest of the book, maybe it'll have been returned. We can even do the photocopying for you because of the circumstances.
Oh, well, that would be great.
I see you've got some books there. Is that the one you were asked to return?
No. I left it in my dorm room. These are books I need to check out today. Is it okay if I bring that one by in a couple of days?
Actually, you need to return it today. That is, if you want to check out those books today. That's our policy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, not a lot of people realize that. In fact, every semester we get a few students who've had their borrowing privileges suspended completely because they haven't returned books. They're allowed to use books only in the library. They're not allowed to check anything out because of unreturned books.
That's not good. I guess I should head back down to the dorm right now then.
But before you go, what you should do is fill out a form requesting the book back in 2 weeks. You don't want to waste any time getting it back.
Thanks a lot. Now I don't feel quite so bad about having to return the book.
Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
So, you signed up for extended borrowing privileges?
Yeah.
But we're still asking you to bring the book back?
Why does the woman say this?
But we're still asking you to bring the book back?
Listen to part of a lecture in a geology class.
So, continuing our discussion of desert lakes, now I want to focus on what's known as the empty quarter. The empty quarter is a huge area of sand that covers about a quarter of the Arabian Peninsula. Today, it's pretty desolate, barren, and extremely hot, but there have been times in the past when monsoon rains soaked the empty quarter and turned it from a desert into grassland that was dotted with lakes and home to various animals. There were actually 2 periods of rain and lake formation. The first one began about 37,000 years ago, and the second one dates from about 10,000 years ago.
Excuse me, Professor, but I'm confused. Why would lakes form in the desert? It's just sand after all.
Good question. We know from modern-day desert lakes, like Lake Eyre in South Australia, that under the right conditions, lakes do form in the desert. But the empty quarter lakes disappeared thousands of years ago. They left behind their beds or basins as limestone formations that we can still see today. They look like low-lying white or gray buttes, long, narrow hills with flat tops, barely a meter high. A recent study of some of the formations presents some new theories about the area's past. Keep in mind, though, that this study only looked at 19 formations, and about 1,000 have been documented, so there's a lot more work to be done. According to this study, 2 factors were important for lake formation in the empty quarter. First, the rains that fell there were torrential, so it would have been impossible for all the water to soak into the ground. Second, as you know, sand dunes contain other types of particles besides sand, including clay and silt. Now, when the rain fell, water ran down the sides of the dunes, carrying clay and silt particles with it. And wherever these particles settled, they formed a pan, a layer that water couldn't penetrate. Once this pan formed, further runoff collected and formed a lake. Now, the older lakes, about half the formations, the ones that started forming 37,000 years ago, the limestone formations we see, they're up to 1 kilometer long, but only a few meters wide, and they're scattered along the desert floor in valleys between the dunes. So the theory is the lakes formed there on the desert floor in these long, narrow valleys. And we know, because of what we know about similar ancient desert lakes, we know that the lakes didn't last very long, from a few months to a few years on average. As for the more recent lakes, the ones from 10,000 years ago, well, they seem to have been smaller, and so may have dried up more quickly. Another difference, very important today for distinguishing between older lake beds and newer ones, is the location of the limestone formations. The more recent beds are high up in the dunes. Why these differences? Well, there are some ideas about that, and they have to do with the shapes of the sand dunes when the lakes were formed. 37,000 years ago, the dunes were probably nicely rounded at the top, so the water just ran right down their sides to the desert floor. But there were thousands of years of wind between the two rainy periods, reshaping the dunes. So during the second rainy period, the dunes were kind of chopped up at the top, full of hollows and ridges, and these hollows would have captured the rain right there on the top. Now, in a grassland and lake ecosystem, we'd expect to find fossils from a variety of animals. And numerous fossils have been found, at least at these particular sites. But where did these animals come from? Well, the theory that has been suggested is that they migrated in from nearby habitats where they were already living. Then, as the lakes dried up, they died out. The study makes a couple of interesting points about the fossils, which I hope will be looked at in future studies. At older lake sites, there's fossil remains from hippopotamuses, water buffalo, animals that spend much of their lives standing in water, and also fossils of cattle. However, at the sites of the more recent lakes, there's only cattle fossils. Additional evidence for geologists that these lakes were probably smaller, shallower, because cattle only use water for drinking, so they survive on much less. Interestingly, there are clam and snail shells, but no fossils of fish. We're not sure why. Maybe there was a problem with the water. Maybe it was too salty. That's certainly true of other desert lakes.
Listen to part of a lecture in a linguistics class. The professor has been discussing animal communication systems.
Okay, so last time we covered the dances honeybees do to indicate where food can be found and the calls and songs of different types of birds. Today, I'd like to look at some communication systems found in mammals, particularly in primates, such as orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas. Yes, Thomas?
Excuse me, Professor, but when you talk about gorilla language, do you mean like those experiments where humans taught them sign language or a language like...
Okay. Wait just a minute. Now, who in this class heard me use the word language? No one, I hope. What we're talking about here are systems of communication, all right?
Oh, sorry, communication, right. But could you maybe, clarify what the difference is?
Of course, that's a fair question. Okay, well, to start with, let's make it clear that language is a type of communication, not the other way around. Okay, so all communication systems, language included, have certain features in common. For example, the signals used to communicate, from the bees' dance movements to the words and sentences found in human language, All these signals convey meaning. And all communication systems serve a purpose, a pragmatic function of some sort, warning of danger perhaps, or offering other needed information. But there are several features peculiar to human language that have, for the most part, never been found in the communication system of any other species. For one thing, learnability. Animals have instinctive communication systems. When a puppy gets to a certain age, it's able to bark. It barks without having to learn how from other dogs. It just barks. But much of human language has to be learned from other humans. What else makes human language unique? What makes it different from animal communication? Deborah.
How about grammar? Like having verbs, nouns, adjectives?
Okay, that's another feature, and it's a good example.
I mean, I mention this because, in my biology class last year, I kind of remember talking about a study on prairie dogs where I think the researchers claimed that the warning cries of prairie dogs constitute language because they have these different parts of speech, like nouns to name the type of predator they spotted, adjectives to describe its size and shape, verbs, but now it seems like...
All right, hold on a moment. I'm familiar with the study you're talking about, and for those of you who don't know, prairie dogs are not actual dogs. They're a type of rodent who burrow in the ground in the grasslands of the western United States and Mexico. And in this study, the researchers looked at the high-pitched barks a prairie dog makes when it spots a predator. And from this, they made some claims about these calls qualifying as an actual language, with its own primitive grammar. But actually, these warning calls are no different from those found among certain types of monkeys. And, let's not even get into the question of whether concepts like noun and verb can be meaningfully applied to animal communication. Another thing that distinguishes a real language is a property we call discreteness. In other words, messages are built up out of smaller parts. Sentences out of words, words out of individual sounds, etc. Now, maybe you could say that the prairie dog's message is built from smaller parts. Like, say, for example, our prairie dog spots a predator, a big coyote approaching rapidly. So the prairie dog makes a call that means coyote, then one that means large, and then another one to indicate its speed. But do you really suppose it makes any difference what order these calls come in? No. But the discrete units that make up language can be put together in different ways. Those smaller parts can be used to form an infinite number of messages, including messages that are completely novel, that have never been expressed before. For example, we can differentiate between a large coyote moves fast and say, move the large coyote fast, or move fast, large coyote. And I truly doubt whether anyone has ever uttered either of these sentences before. Human language is productive, an open-ended communication system, whereas no other communication system has this property. And another feature of language that's not displayed by any form of animal communication is what we call displacement. That is, language is abstract enough that we can talk about things that aren't present here and now. Things like, my friend Joe is not in the room, or it'll probably rain next Thursday. Prairie dogs may be able to tell you about a hawk that's circling overhead right now, but they've never shown any inclination to describe the one they saw last week.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
When you talk about gorilla language, do you mean like those experiments where humans taught them sign language or a language like...
Okay. Wait just a minute. Now, who in this class heard me use the word language?
Why does the professor say this?
Now, who in this class heard me use the word language?